Hello everyone. So last week, Nadisha and I went to the station, and Nadisha bought some Bitcoin on her phone. So I thought we'd just give you a quick walkthrough of the BreadWallet app that you actually use to buy those Bitcoins from the ATM, and then I'm going to show you how you give those Bitcoins all to me. Right? Sounds good?
No.
Well, okay, that's what we're going to do. So you can see on the screen here, BreadWallet's a very, very simple app. There's basically just two screens. One allows you to send money, and one allows you to receive money.
Yeah.
And if you want to receive money, that's the QR code that you present to other people,
Yeah.
and they will scan their device. And that QR code, if you can see underneath it, that's your current Bitcoin address, right?
Right.
So you can either just give them that string of characters, or they can scan that QR code, right? If you want to send money, which is what we're going to be doing today, right, then you can either pay address from clipboard, or you can scan somebody else's QR code, right? So before we transfer, oh, by the way, and the balance that you have up here is 27,000 milli Bitcoins, right?
Oh wow.
So it's basically it's a small fraction of a Bitcoin, and that, as per current exchange rate, is £13.81, right? So that's your current balance.
What? You transferred £15?
Yeah.
Oh.
So what's going to happen now? Just before we actually transfer that money to me, I can show you. So this screen is your actual transactions. This is your transaction history. Okay.
Yep.
So you can see there are two transactions. So the first one, if you remember, was the first approximately £10 that I transferred to you. That's when the camera wasn't turned on, right? And the second one was basically for £4.60. So when we put the extra fiver in, that's the one that we actually filmed. Right.
Yeah.
So these two transactions, you can actually click on them and see the transaction details like this. Let's focus on this one because that's the one that's actually in the previous video.
Yep.
Right. So a few things about this transaction. First of all, this is the transaction ID, right? So if you remember, and we'll show you on the blockchain.info website how we can actually see this transaction has actually appeared in the blockchain. So it's now circulated all the way around the world and has been validated and kind of permanently etched in the blockchain forever, right?
Right.
So that's the transaction ID. Okay, this one here. You can copy that and so and then you can use that to send around and investigate the transaction. Status. So it says the status is confirmed in block number 419,858, and it tells you the date on which it was confirmed. Right. So it tells you the block in the blockchain that this transaction is actually stored in. Right. Then it gives you the amount in Bitcoin, but and then the approximate value is £4.60.
£4.60. Yes.
Yeah. The reason it's £4.60 is because there are various sort of transaction fees, etc., just like you.
So is it? Oh right. Okay. So that there's a transaction fee.
Yeah, and we'll get to transaction fees in a later video. It's a very important part of the Bitcoin system, right? Transaction
that
fees.
way it pays the miners.
Exactly. So the people who are actually.
There's no centralized system to reward otherwise.
Yeah. You're jumping the gun a bit, but yeah, that's actually true.
Sorry if I'm getting ahead of myself here.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, that's the amount, and then you can see the from address here. So this is the from address that belongs to the actual the ATM. So the ATM accepts your cash, and the ATM has an address itself.
So
right?
is it like a node?
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. And then this was your wallet address that you scanned when you hit the thing, right? So if we actually, so while we're here, so if we actually just go over here to the blockchain.info website, right? So you can see this is that transaction ID up here.
Yep.
Right. And we can see, so down here we can see the size of the transaction. So it's very small. It's only like 330 bytes. You can see that the time was last Friday, right, 8th of July, included in block number 419858, which is what we saw there. Okay, 740 confirmations, right? So basically, what that means is that there are lots and lots of blocks that have happened. This was nearly a week ago now, right? So since then, there are lots of blocks on top of that. So if you think about going back to the first video and the checks, right, there are 700 boxes on top now. So if somebody wants to basically reprocess that, it's a sort of infeasible to find to actually manage to do that, right? And that's really that. So and over here, I'm just gonna introduce some very basic concepts here about the kind of the anatomy of a Bitcoin transaction, and we'll go into more detail probably in the next video. But a Bitcoin transaction is essentially composed of inputs and outputs. Okay, and the inputs are basically represented by outputs of previous transactions that have been paid to the person who's paying you. So basically, this was the Bitcoin address of the ATM, right? And so basically, what we're saying is that that this address here is entitled to pay you this Bitcoin because he has been the recipient on the output side of previous transactions. Right. And that's how, and you will see in a second here, and this will make it clearer, when you send me the Bitcoins, which we'll do in a second, you'll see that the new transaction that creates is you're enabled to actually make that transaction because you are going to be spending the outputs from this transaction. Right. So don't worry too much. I'm just giving a sort of a very kind of, let's say, high level overview, and we'll go into more kind of rigorous depth next time. But it's just important to notice that, so over here we have a transaction is composed of inputs which refer to the outputs, i.e. the payee of previous transactions, which were paid to the payer, which entitle him to say, well, I've got these Bitcoins, now I can give them to you. Right.
I'm looking forward to the next video.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that wasn't too clear.
Okay, so that's fine. So we'll actually revisit it when we actually do the transaction now, right?
Okay.
But and this one is saying, so from this address is paying your address this amount of Bitcoin, which is 0.00921 Bitcoin, and then it's paying this amount. So there are two recipients in this transaction. The first one is you, right?
Yeah.
And the second one is basically paying back to himself, the ATM. The ATM is paying it back to themselves as change, right? And so the reason they do that, again, is a very important but actually not too difficult concept in terms of Bitcoin transactions. I'm not going to explain it now, but we'll explain it when we get into more depth about the details. But it's important to remember, it's basically because, so if you think about, if you go into Waitrose and you buy something for £6 and you only have a £10 note in your pocket, you can't just break off 60% of the note and hand it to them. You have to give them the full £10, and then you receive change back. And that's exactly what this is, right? And that, so we'll go into more detail about why this happens, but that's exactly why you see that this guy basically is only able to spend the exact units of Bitcoin transactions that he's received.
Right.
And that might help sort of illustrate the concept of the fact that outputs from previous transactions become the inputs to the next ones. Because it's literally like, okay, if I received £10, let's say if I received one whole Bitcoin in a previous transaction, then I can spend that one Bitcoin and allocate it to a new recipient. Right? But if I want to give that recipient less than one Bitcoin, I still have to pay them. Basically, I have to make sure that I spend this entire one Bitcoin amount give them what the proportion that I want to give them, and then give myself change back.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a very important topic, right?
Okay.
So, and then you got the total input was this, total output was this, and then you got the transaction fee, which we just talked about. Transaction fee is the fee that actually went to the successful miner of this block. Yeah. So just to reiterate that concept, so this transaction here was, if I just click on this, so that is in this block here, right? So that transaction fee, which was part of 419858, you can see that remember the first transaction in any block, right? It's the one that the miner says, okay, I'm paying myself newly generated Bitcoin, and I also get all of the transaction fee from all the transactions in the block, right? So basically that's that. So I'm just going to quickly show you, before I forget, how to transfer all the money back into my own Bitcoin wallet, right? Because that's the most important thing. So I'm going to basically go back to the home screen, and I'm going to say send money. So first of all, look at the balance. So I'm going to pay myself, let's say, 25,000. Right? I'm going to leave you.
Let's do 5,000.
5,000.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do 10. All right. So we're going to do scan QR code, right? So it's quite simple. Yeah. I'm just going to put that there. It's going to scan the QR code that's from my BreadWallet, right? And I'm going to put.
Excuse me.
All right, and then I'm going to put the passcode in, and that's sent, right? So we'll see a few interesting things here, right? First of all, we'll see in your transactions on the screen. So now we've got a new transaction. It has 0 confirmations, which means obviously it has not yet been included in the blockchain. Exactly. Yeah. If we wait 5 minutes or so, or 10 minutes, we'll see it actually appear in the blockchain. Approximately £8 of value. If I click on this, so now we see the transaction ID. Yeah. Right. Waiting for confirmation. All the same things, and this is my Bitcoin address, right? 1EPCOEFMD, etc., etc. That's the transaction fee, right? So worth noting. So in that transaction, it would cost approximately 4 pence, right? The transaction. Right. Yeah. And that's so it's from your address to my address. Right. So if I just copy this, so you can copy this here. I'm going to show you how you can actually just open the. So you can open the blockchain.info site on your phone, right? So we can paste the hash, the transaction hash in there. Right. So here we see we have the home page on the phone. It's the same site, right? Blockchain.info. It's an unconfirmed transaction. All the same details there, right? And there are all the details. So while waiting for the confirmation in the blockchain, which is taking a little while, I just want to go back to what we said before about the outputs of one previous transaction becoming the inputs of the next one. So the transactions themselves are sort of chained together in that sense, and I'll show you exactly what I mean in terms of the change as well. So this is the transaction that you've just paid me, right? So this is the new transaction ID. We're waiting for it to be confirmed. This is your Bitcoin address, right? This is mine, 13F9, and you've paid me 0.003373, and you've paid yourself 0.015 in change, right? Because you see this address here is the same as this one here, right? Right. And why is that? Well, you decided or I did.
You did for me.
Yeah. That this was the amount you wanted to pay for me. So the software inside my wallet said, basically, have a look around for any transactions that have previously been paid to me that I have not yet spent, right? And find, just like you would look around in your wallet to find the lowest, let's say the lowest denomination that's higher than the amount you have to pay. It'll pick one out and say, okay, I'm going to spend this one, right? And then obviously it'll give any change back to itself that is in excess of what you want to pay.
Yeah.
So if we look here, okay, if we look, so
Yeah, I can see it.
if you see, this is the input. The input of this transaction is basically, it says it's 0.01845 Bitcoins output. So we can click on this output and see, okay, which transaction is that actually from, right? We know which transaction it was from. It was from the initial transaction which you did at the ATM.
Yep.
Right? So if we see here, if remember, this was the ATM's Bitcoin address. Right? And in the transaction where you put the £5 note in the ATM, it said, right, for your £5, you get 0.01845 Bitcoins. Right? That was the conversion rate minus transaction fees. So that's what was paid into your BreadWallet Bitcoin wallet, right? This is what the machine, the ATM machine, paid back to itself, right? Yeah. So this output here that's paid to you, belonging to this transaction, it's literally like having a coin in your wallet that you can then spend in the next transaction, right? That you can spend, right? And the amount is exactly that. 0.01845 is like a unit, right?
It's like a note.
It's like a note or a coin. You can't split it up and say, okay, I'm literally gonna basically just pay somebody, 0.016 and then just keep the rest.
Standard amount?
No, it's not. So this amount was calculated just using the exchange rate at the Bitcoin ATM, right? Minus the transaction fee. That's the amount that you got for your money, right? Now this guy, he basically said, well, I'm paying this amount here, right, in total, and so what I'm going to do is I have to pay you this, but I'm going to spend this one and then give the rest back to myself in change, because essentially the ATM had to look inside. I mean, the ATM is also running essentially Bitcoin wallet software, so they had to look in their wallet and say, well, someone's just put £5 in there, right? Now that, as per the current exchange rate, is this amount of Bitcoin. So the ATM said, okay, we'll find a transaction that is more than that. I'm going and which was paid to me, right? I'm going to spend that transaction, and then whatever's left in change, I pay back to myself, right? And this output here, right? So each transaction has basically a list of outputs. So normally you'd have.
What do you mean by list?
So here you've got two, right? On the left hand side you have the inputs. On the right hand side you've got the outputs. The first output is the payment to you. The second output here is the change, right? It's possible theoretically to have, more outputs in the transaction.
How?
Well, we'll get to that. But that's the structure of a transaction. You have inputs, and you can have several inputs on the left as well, right? Just like you can get a £5 note and a £10 note from your wallet to pay for something that's £12, right? So you can have multiple transactions on the left as inputs, and they have to be corresponding outputs that were paid to you in a previous transaction, right? And then the outputs are basically, essentially, the total amount of all the outputs generally adds up to all the total amount of the inputs minus the transaction fee. The transaction fee is actually not listed here. It's implicitly, basically, because the transaction fee is actually collected by the Bitcoin miner. And at the time of the transaction, you don't know nobody knows who the Bitcoin miner is going to be. Right. So does that make sense now?
Yeah.
The 0.01845 is the amount that you received in a transaction, and that entitles you to therefore spend that entire. And that was the only Bitcoin you had in your wallet, right? Actually, you did have another one because I put.
have a Bitcoin, I had milli Bitcoin.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, you're right. You had
Maybe
some.
we should try doing a Bitcoin next time, Matt.
Well, if you're feeling generous, right? So so that's the key point. And when you paid that to me, you had to basically spend the entire output, and then give yourself back the change in a completely sort of new. And so now, if you go to your own Bitcoin wallet, you'll see that this thing here is now a unit of Bitcoin that you can then spend again, right? See what I mean?
Yeah.
So your Bitcoin wallet now has is basically looking at this and saying, waiting for the next time you spend something, and this one here will be eligible for you to spend, right? And this one is sitting in my Bitcoin wallet. Make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that was sort of, always think it makes makes it quite clear to actually show you examples of real transactions, especially when it's your money that's involved, right? All right, so we've actually waited quite a while now, and finally the transaction has actually appeared in the blockchain, right? So now we can see it's included in block number 420600. Okay, we can see it's so basically that means one confirmation. So there's one, it's basically in the first block on top of the stack. All the other details obviously are completely unchanged. But now let's have a quick look at remember the transaction fee that was in the transaction, right? That was basically the difference between the inputs and the outputs. That goes to the miner. So let's have a look at who the lucky miner and the recipient of your transaction fee was. So if we just basically go back and click on the home page for this particular block, rather than the transaction, and again we can see. So you can see that the first transaction in the block which is called the Coinbase transaction, and that's the transaction that the miner of the block actually pays to themselves, right? And you can see, so in this transaction here, the Coinbase transaction, let's just open that quickly again, right? And we can see, so the interesting thing about the Coinbase transaction, which is the first transaction in the block, is that it's the only type of Bitcoin transaction that doesn't require any outputs to spend. And that's because this is the reward that comes from nothing, right? So nobody has to pay them. They don't have to earn those Bitcoins to be able to spend them. They basically, so when they mine the block, the Bitcoin algorithm that's running on their computer generates an amount of Bitcoin that's never existed in the past and pays it to their address, right? And that includes, basically, that amount there includes the current reward for mining a block, right? Which is basically 12 plus the transaction fees. So all the transaction fees, including yours, are included in that amount there. Right. And his computer, his mining computer, calculated the sum of all those transaction fees by taking each transaction and then basically summing all the outputs and subtracting all the inputs. And the difference is implicitly the transaction fee. He did that for all of the transactions while mining the block, and he adds that to the fixed fee, the fixed reward the fixed reward that the Bitcoin miner gets for mining a new block. Each time a Bitcoin miner mines a new block, the Bitcoin protocol rewards him.
Whether they solve it or not?
No, only the person who solves it.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So we'll get more into mining and that kind of thing later on, but just to kind of show you way around this, hopefully getting a bit more familiar. It was just an introduction to how it is, so we'll go into more depth next time on the inputs and outputs side. But okay, so guys, thanks for watching as well, and if you have any questions, please leave them down below. And I know it's quite a lot in that video, but I do think it's helpful to see real examples. Okay. See you next one.